It's the Idea Podcast. My name is Seth Tower Hurd. Alex Feinberg, I guess kind of one of those internet friends I picked up along the way. When you just asked, what are we talking about? The podcast is based around the fact that I've grown a group of people on Substack that kind of really enjoy what I'm doing as far as commenting on news and pop culture and that type of thing. You're a guy, you just started asking me a bunch of science questions before we get on. I'm the most not sciencey person I know. So probably not going to dive into your very, very interesting mind as far as workouts and cooking and everything else, which is that's really how you got known online, right? That was the first thing that really grew your audience.
First and foremost, it was abs, pizza, burgers, tacos, and mixing them all together.
Burgers, tacos. I'll give your background, but give me that part, and then I'll kind of give your, baseball tech scene stuff. Just how would you summarize kind of what you did that was so unique in that world?
I realized inadvertently that you don't need to eat sissy salads and starve yourself to become incredibly shredded if you're following a proper workout plan. So basically, I never thought that I could have abs because I never thought I had the genetics for it. But I had trained consistently through my years at Google, my time working at a hedge fund, my time working in the cryptocurrency industry. And I noticed that if I trained a certain way, meaning not necessarily all day, every day, but trained in a style that meant I was running faster and lifting harder and resting sufficiently so I could continue to run faster and continue to lift heavier, I could eat 3,000 to 4,000 calories a day, like whatever my body craved, as long as it was protein dominant real food. And as long as I was hungry and I stopped eating when I was full and I limited my sugar consumption, and I got unbelievably more shredded than you're supposed to get without counting calories because, and I realized in retrospect, I was focusing on activities that were massively increasing my resting metabolic rate. So a lot of people don't realize that you burn way more calories outside the gym than you will ever burn inside the gym. And what a lot of these people who might realize that fact don't get down the road or related to that is your diet is actually in many ways downstream from your exercise plan. So most trainers will say diet is more important than training because you can only burn 600 calories or so in the gym, but you can eat them all back right away. And it's like, that's true. But ultimately, I found that if you train like an athlete, if you run fast, if you lift heavy, if you take sufficient breaks, and you eat protein dominant real food when you're hungry until you're full, a lot of people get substantially better results than they do if they're tracking everything meticulously. And we can get into why that can be kind of stupid. And they're having way more fun doing it. It's more sustainable. It's more enjoyable. And so that was the fitness program that popularized me a few years ago on Twitter. But then since then, obviously my fitness program is downstream from how my mind works. And the same mind that allowed me to become a professional athlete or work at a hedge fund or work at Google was also the mind that created my fitness program. And so since then, I've expanded beyond fitness into life coaching, business consulting, executive coaching, sort of sharing the mental models and sharing the ideas and frameworks that I've built over my 10 years in Silicon Valley, 2 years in professional baseball, 4 years in Division I baseball, with high-performing individuals, predominantly men, who are interested in continuing to perform at a higher and higher level each year.
Ned, good stuff there. I think you actually just hit on what I was going to say, which is you just seem to have made all the right transitions. The order was Wall Street, hedge fund, then Google, then crypto.
Yes.
Then solo.
Then
right?
Online.
And
yes, correct.
You made all those jumps at the right time. That's what's fascinating to me. And I will be fully transparent and say, I would consider myself like the most successful screw up in my 20s because I was succeeding at things that were making a ton of money. And it worked me 80 hours a week. So by the time I was in my mid 20s, I was on an Emmy winning TV show. I was doing another TV show. I, had interviewed everybody from Gerard Butler to Barack Obama. And I had really cool perks. So I could go to House of Blues and get into kind of the backstage area pretty much whenever, even when stuff was sold out. That stuff was really fun. I woke up when I was 28, 29 years old, realized my friends were like in relationships and married and bought houses. And I worked all weekend, every weekend. I did really cool things. I met interesting people, but I didn't really like my life very much. And I remember two things happening that you jumped and I didn't. The first one was I saw Bitcoin when it was $70 and I didn't do anything about it. And the second thing was I saw the internet coming, and I had a pretty, I'd kind of gotten to the top because I was in market 3 in media, and I let my kind of the negative voices of my bosses who wanted to make money off of me not just say to hell with this, and kind of blow up the traditional media thing that is in the background of everything now, and just say whatever. I don't care if I got to deliver pizzas. I'm going to get on the internet and just do that thing.
Yeah.
What made you jump?
So I got out of baseball not because of any fortuitous timing, but because it was very clear to me that my career was coming to the end of the road, and that happened to be in the middle of a huge recession in the winter of 2009. Now, at that time, I didn't really realize how bad of a condition the economy was in because I was just a year and a half out of school, and I never really followed, articles in the Wall Street Journal or financial news in any capacity. I ended up connecting with a hedge fund manager specifically because I didn't have any path into a more formal institution. Because, you might not realize it, but most hiring processes at major companies are not situated to make it easy for professional athletes to transition out of their sports careers and work for them. Even if a hiring manager would say, "Oh, I would love to hire an athlete," well, guess what? Your hiring process precludes you from hiring the actually good ones, because the actually good ones are not going to come through your university recruiting program. And if you want to wait for them to go to business school, perhaps you could recruit them then, but there's no actual way for you to recruit them into your graduate hires camp when they're like 24 and a couple years out of college. You also can't put them in your MBA pipeline. You also can't put them in your experienced hire pipeline. So I was a little bit of a conundrum because I didn't fit in any role at like a major bank. I didn't have the experience to be an experienced hire, but I was more experienced than the people coming out of college. But I couldn't interview for the same roles that they were interviewing for because I didn't have access to campus interviews. So I had to pave my own path. And oftentimes when people pave their own paths, it either fails or it ends up being way more interesting than the normal path. My path ended up being quite interesting. I worked for a former member of the board of directors of Paine Webber back when they were a major investment bank in the 80s. He had been living in Hong Kong for about almost 20 years at that point, made a bunch of money, and developed a very cynical view of both the Federal Reserve System, the United States government, global governments. And I kept an open mind to everything he was saying because this was before Bitcoin really took off. This was before it became very common for people to talk about Federal Reserve conspiracies, central banking conspiracies. And I just objectively listened to what he said, and I analyzed the information that I had accessible for to either validate or dispute what he would say. And at the very minimum, I could agree that, it does seem that the structure of the Federal Reserve Bank is a little bit corrupt. And after working with him for about a year and a half, he was a global macro hedge fund manager. So his mind was oriented to figure out, okay, how is this market structure oriented in a way that will advantage or disadvantage a certain asset class? And as my mind started to think in similar ways, you start thinking, okay, where's the money flowing? Because the money's going to flow from this industry to that industry. What does that mean the job markets are going to look like? How do you have leverage when you're negotiating to get more income? And I started to realize, if you want to make money, you need to go into an industry that has greater effective demand for your services than there are people who can supply them. And I was in finance at the time where the reverse was happening. There were more people who could supply services than there was demand for them. And I thought, this is not good. I don't want to be in an industry where there's 5 people capable of servicing 3 open roles. I want to be in an industry where there's 3 people capable of servicing 5 open roles. That's how I'm going to get paid without having to work 80 hours per week. So I decided in 2011, that I wanted to get into tech. And this was a few years before everybody else was who was in finance. And so, in 2011, when I moved back from Hong Kong, where I was working, to Silicon Valley, where I grew up, I was telling everybody, I want to go work in Silicon Valley. I want to go work in tech. And people were thinking, why do you want to go from finance, which they saw as a high paying opportunity, to tech, which they saw as a less lucrative opportunity? And in my mind, I thought, well, this is where the puck is going. So I elevator pitched my way into Google in 2011. I made almost no progress trying to get hired by them in my first 2 months trying. And then, in 5 minutes one morning, I ended up basically talking my way into a job. And I ended up staying there for about 6 years, working a number of different roles not because I loved Google, but because I realized that getting paid a six-figure salary and not having to work more than 45 hours any week in my 20s while getting my meals paid for and a lot of other things taken care of was not something that I should take for granted. And so I was very patient in looking for other opportunities, but I also was very clear of one thing. I never wanted to sell my body to my company. It was very clear to me that American corporations, including the one I was working for, were structured to take advantage of their workers. They were oriented to convince their workers that it made sense to trade their health, to depreciate their body in exchange for very, very small compensation increases in the form of promotions. And so because of the experience that I had working in finance, because of the experience that I had working as a professional athlete, I was very in tune to how manipulation worked, how propaganda worked, how your mind would be used against you, how you would be coerced into performing labor for less than what your market value might be. And I saw all of these angles playing out in ways that my Google colleagues didn't. So I kind of decided, like, I'm going to keep collecting a paycheck, but I'm not going to let this job own me the way it owns many of my colleagues. I'm not going to let my performance review determine how happy I am, or I'm not going to let this promotion that I'm up for change how I relate to other people inside or outside of the company. And so I did a great job, in my view, of keeping my mental and emotional independence from a label that was bestowed upon me by my company. And ultimately, that left me in a position where I was continuing to get access to outside information, seeing what was happening in crypto. I never bought crypto back in 2011 when I first had exposure to it. I was buying bullion, like we were at our hedge fund, having that delivered to our office at Google. And so when Bitcoin would have been like $25 a Bitcoin, I was getting thousands of dollars of silver and gold bullion delivered to our Google office. And so, obviously if I put 10% of that into Bitcoin, I'd be much wealthier than I am today, but, c'est la vie. And so I worked in crypto for a few years, and I worked in crypto. I didn't think I was early to crypto. I didn't get into crypto till Bitcoin crossed 10,000, but 10,000 is a lot less than 60,000 where it is right now. And so I never thought that I was a super early adopter to anything. I just sort of kept my mind open to what I thought made sense and tried very hard to protect myself against propaganda spells that I believed were being cast against me by my superiors or by my peers, which is a very, very important thing to do if you're working in an American corporation.
Man, that's fascinating, because one of the things that I've noticed, a thing that keeps people hooked, is they don't just need the salary, they need the title. And I think one of the things that's got to be tough about Google is people can't leave Google or whatever the similar company is. I mean, I'm in St. Louis. It's going to be a different kind of prestigious company. People want to be known as the kind of person that works at blah, 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 and whatever, pick your company. And it just keeps them being a cog. Like, they really need that internally.
Oh, I mean, when I was working at Google, it was very helpful to me in social settings. Oh, okay. The second thing people ask you after asking your name is, what do you do? Well, I don't want to tell people I do something that they'll look down on. So, I work at Google, right? So it's like, oh, okay, Alex is part of us, right? And so it was important for me to be accepted by the group, kind of. And so I often struggled with, what am I going to do when I'm no longer working at Google? It's going to be so weird not telling people that I work at Google. Now, I ended up working at a crypto exchange after that, and that was a good job to have in a hot industry at the time. But this is all too common, even for people who don't have the financial need for a paycheck. I was just catching up with one of my Google colleagues yesterday, and her husband actually made a bunch of money investing in Bitcoin early. So she doesn't have to have a high paying job anymore. But she was sort of, I wouldn't say embarrassed, but she was hesitant to broadcast to the world that she wanted to take a non-senior position at a startup because it interested her. And it didn't require as much as a higher paying job at Google. But, her entire network is men and women who went to elite schools, who worked at elite companies, and she didn't want to signal to them that she was falling behind. And so what these companies have done a tremendous job at doing is convincing their employees that their compensation extends beyond what they're getting monetarily, and it actually goes into the level that we assign you. And if they can convince their employees that their self-worth is linked to the level that they're at in the company, then that's not a company, that's a cult. And if you want to get your employees to do the most work for the least amount of money, you need to transition your workforce from operating like a company to operating like a cult. And if you look at how these Silicon Valley companies run, the effective ones, a lot of times they border on running like cults.
And that's kind of where I really wanted to grab time with you and go, because I think your people will find this really interesting as well. I want to pause real quick and describe both of our upbringings, because the fact that we're friends and the fact that we see much of the world the same way is pretty unexpected. So why don't you go first? Because my crew is not going to know who you are. Where you grew up, what your parents did for a job, what your kind of what your life was like growing up. Who were your social
I grew up in the
circles,
San
etc.
Francisco Bay Area
Yeah.
at a time where the San Francisco Bay Area was very different than it is right now. So people think of San Francisco and they think, oh, this is this far left communist city, which is correct at the moment. But where I grew up in a suburb with, I would say it was a purple suburb, if not purple leaning red suburb.
Yeah.
And even the California, when I was in third grade or fourth grade, passed Prop 187, which was originally designed to deny social services to illegal immigrants, right? It was struck down at the Supreme Court level, but California was a conservative state. California had a Republican governor for much of my childhood. California struck down gay marriage when I was in high school. So California was a much more centrist state where I grew up, but I grew up in one of the more liberal areas of a more centrist state. And I think, if you're trying to optimize yourself, your kids for intellectual growth, you want them to be slightly left of a true centrist, not a 2024 centrist, but slightly left of a true centrist environment will offer them the most opportunity to ask why. Why is this structured this way? Why did this event happen as it did? And, my dad was a lawyer. My mom founded a nonprofit that was structured around immigration reform because she thought that, there was no way that the United States was going to maintain its social fabric, allowing in, with mass immigration unchecked. And so, I had my dad, who was a Jewish Democrat his entire life, and my mom, who in some ways is a Democrat, but in some ways is an independent, and in some ways is a Republican, kind of feeding me ideas for how and why the world worked. And then you had me, who wanted to be an athlete, spending a lot of time, in the weight room, on the track, in the batting cage, on the baseball field, trying to be a professional baseball player. And so where I was, where I grew up, who I grew up with, all sort of made me into the person who I became, especially when I left the Bay Area and for Nashville, Tennessee in 2004, where I started at Vanderbilt my freshman year. And going from California to Vanderbilt really helped me see the juxtaposition between traditional Bible Belt South and traditional West Coast culture. And, after a couple years, really see the benefit, the strengths and weaknesses of each one, because I feel like a lot of the people who I grew up with in California never left. And a lot of the people who I'm friends with outside of California never actually lived in California. And so oftentimes I feel that even though I might not be an expert in any singular area, the fact that I've spent time in multiple industries and lived in multiple geographies helps expose to me the insanity of a lot of ideas that most people simply take for granted.
Dang. So let me jump in to juxtapose that, because you've done all that stuff, and I feel like you are closer in worldview to where I'm from, which is Appalachian culture. My mom's side of the family farms. My dad's side of the family is a little more of a mixed bag. My grandfather actually was in my freshman college textbook as a research psychologist, and then part of my dad's family worked for Caterpillar, the heavy equipment manufacturing company. What I see that you did that I wish I could have had somebody to show me in my 20s is that I grew up small town America, got deer season off of school, but you had to be back after sundown for basketball practice. And everything that you did is sort of heterodox thinking. You know, in a way, everything that I grew up around was like, follow the system to a good life. And I followed the system through my 20s, and that hit me with a crisis at like 29 of like, I can't even get into a relationship because how am I going to do that? I work Fridays and Saturday nights at very cool events, but like I'm miserable. And it still took me probably 2 years to process through. And because I know this sounds dumb, but I was like, well, I can be on TV and I can freaking interview famous people. I'm not good at anything else, which was not the case. But I'd followed the system so long, I'd only ever had positive feedback there. If I would have been able to step outside myself and realize like valedictorian high school did very well academically, I learned quickly, I could have picked up another skill set pretty easily. Instead, I got 2 advanced degrees because I had employers that would pay for them. And I just kind of kept going lockstep through that. I adjuncted college classes, which was very fun. But I love the way I grew up. For whatever reason, it took me into my 30s to figure out how to play more offense than I wish I would have played in my 20s. Somehow you just got that. Do you think that was coming from a bigger area? Do you think that was parenting? Do you think that's just genetics or what?
No, life begins when systems fail you. When the system fails you and you're smart enough to kind of reverse engineer as to why, that's when your mind truly grows. And so I'll give you my personal example.
Yeah.
Granted, like my IQ was tested at 145 when I was 17 years old. So a lot of the ideas that I have, and that I came to find out are on the back of like some sort of genetic foundation that most people don't have. Okay.
Yeah.
But from that, I will still say that at 17 years old, I knew far less about the world than at 22 or 27 or 32. Okay. So I had falsely assumed at a young age that if I work hard and I continue to excel in all the opportunities that are thrown my way, life is going to be fair. And everybody who complains about life being unfair is just bitter because they're a loser. And you need to be a little bit delusional like that in order to put the work in that's necessary to succeed. And so I wasn't wrong for believing those falsehoods, but it needed to be reconciled with reality as I grew up. And so my baseball career ended up being very, very stressful to me because a lot of the false assumptions that helped propel me through my career also really frustrated me by the time I got to college. Namely, I continued to be one of the hardest workers on my team, but I stopped getting better the way others on my team got better when they weren't working as hard. And so you start realizing, oh, the way your mind is structured can actually help you in certain areas, but it might hurt you in other areas. Namely, highly logical people with executive reasoning skills typically don't succeed at a high level in baseball. Not always the case, but there's a reason why. If you look at the cognitive structure, or a lot of psychologists hate Myers-Briggs, but Myers-Briggs at least allows the taker to identify how they feel about certain situations, right? People with ENTJ Myers-Briggs are often overrepresented in executive roles. They are highly underrepresented in elite sports because the logical processes that are required to think when you have minutes, hours, or days to solve a problem are actually way too slow when you have microseconds to make a decision on the sports field. And so I came to realize that if you become overdeveloped in a certain area that's inapplicable in another area, that's actually worse than never developing that skill in the first place when you're being judged in a new area. Baseball requires heuristic shortcuts, because if you have under half a second to make a decision, the only thing you have time for is a heuristic shortcut. This situation resembles that situation, therefore I'm going to make that decision with no rational cognitive processing. And so you start realizing in college, oh, the thing that I'm cognitively optimized for isn't rewarded on the baseball field, it's actually punished. Okay, fine. Well, I'm still okay at baseball. I'm putting all my time into it. I'm going to see if I can be a professional athlete. I get drafted. I succeed somewhat my first year in the minor leagues. But when it becomes clear that the writing's on the wall and my career's not going anywhere, when I try to break into the work world, knowing that I was a graduate with honors from a top 20 university, Not only that, I was an all SEC player and I was drafted by a professional team, but I'm not even allowed to interview at my own alma mater's campus interviews because I graduated a year and a half prior. I can't enter any mainstream, blue chip company because I'm not coming out of college. I just happen to have gotten drafted by a professional sports organization that prevented me from coming straight out of college. And you're telling me now I have to take a back seat to other people who underperformed me for the last 4 to 6 years of my life, who are sleeping in when I was getting up early to train? That's what this system is structured to allow for? No, that's wrong. That is wrong, wrong, wrong. And so once I realized, like, oh, actually the system will allow people to slip through the cracks, and it's my job to figure out how to make it work, and it doesn't matter if it's fair or unfair. I have to make it fair for me. The months of struggle that came after that forced me to develop mental frameworks that have proven to be incredibly helpful for both myself navigating the corporate world, but for also the people I coach. Because if you put somebody in a high pressure situation and that person's a winner and that person figures out how to win, he's going to get 10 times as many lessons than he would if everything was going good for him and he could just follow the path that he was on.
Dang. I'm going to do a quick sidebar before we move on here, because you revealed something to me that never clicked for me before. I played at essentially what would be considered now like a last chance U for a basketball program. And so more than half the team was there because they were D1 and were in some sort of legal issue that knocked them out of Division I and sent them back down to junior college. Like literally my coach's recruiting strategy was to recruit out of jail in Chicago. So my best friend that year he did like a year at Wisconsin, phenomenally talented. I think he's in prison. I can't find him. I think he's probably in prison if I had to guess, because I haven't been able to locate him for years. And looking back, I kind of wonder, because I was valedictorian in high school, and I think my coach saw that and signed me as a good influence and tutor, possibly. Like I'm not kidding. I think that he kind of wanted somebody to ground the team a little bit. And so I played and I contributed.
Yeah, well, coaches do that.
Yeah.
They're chemists.
Yeah. And so when I look back on, I was the only one on the team that I would say is non-impulsive. And so one of the guys transferred in because some dude talked to his girlfriend at a party and he hit the guy with a brick, like an actual, riot brick.
Sure.
I had never thought of the fact that the reason I was doing well academically was probably the thing that was keeping me from being really good at a sport where really, really quick decisions are made.
Yeah, it's a different language. Hey, you're really good at speaking Italian, but this is Russian.
Yeah.
So stop trying to speak Italian in Russia. If the better you do, the more you're going to confuse people.
So did you?
In fact,
no, go for it.
A child who cannot speak Italian but understands how to use like body language better is going to be in a better position to communicate in Russia than somebody who's spent the last 20 years of their life perfecting their Italian.
Yeah. Was that easy? Were you good to just walk away? Were you okay? Did you deal with a lot of regret?
The game was incredibly stressful for me.
Yeah.
The game was incredibly stressful for me, so it wasn't the worst thing in the world for me to just walk away. I was getting burned out of it. I was ready for my next chapter. I was bitter. I was especially bitter when I found myself in Hong Kong, and in Hong Kong, nobody cares what you do as an American athlete, right? I was used to America. In the United States, even if the corporations can't hire you because of how they're structured, they still respect the fact that you're a professional athlete. When you go abroad, they kind of think that you're dumb. They think that you're worse off because you played sports. Oh, your parents let you play sports in college? No. They were very proud that I could play sports in college.
Yeah. You by the way, do you still coach baseball? Not anymore, right?
No, not really. No.
Okay, you did. Let's do a sidebar on that, because this conversation is becoming a lot about how to make transitions and have success. St. Louis, like a lot of kind of suburban driven American cities, we're getting questions already because our oldest is 5, and they're like, well, what are you going to put her in? I'm like, what do you mean? They're like, well, what are you going to do for travel sports? I'm like, we're not. Like, I got to college by just playing on concrete in the summer. Like, I mean,
Right.
I don't particularly care if my, now 5-year-old is 12 and is in junior elite, blah, 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 blah. Cause I'm not particularly interested in spending my weekends driving to Des Moines for cheerleading or lacrosse or whatever, and then just driving home. I
Let
think
me explain
that's,
this. Let me
yeah,
frame this in a way that you may not have thought of.
yeah,
You and I, despite the fact that we went to universities, you and I are kind of free form entrepreneurs who would much rather have somebody have a lot of raw cognitive or raw horsepower that can be molded than to have somebody who has a highly curated skill set that fits neatly into somebody else's bureaucratic system. Most suburban parents have a highly curated or highly manicured skill set that fits neatly into someone else's bureaucracy. And so for them, their way of surviving in the world is running faster on the hamster wheel when the hamster next to them is running faster on the hamster wheel. So for them, when they see other people's kids going into these sporting events or sporting leagues, and they see other people's kids studying and doing SAT prep and all that stuff, they're going to push their kids to go harder into those events. Whereas you and I might see that and we see, oh, there's way too many people over investing in something that isn't even essential for success in life. So let's back up and think what is. Well, we want you to be really smart. We want you to be resilient, and we would like you to be physically healthy and have some degree of athleticism as it relates to physical and mental health. Okay,
yeah,
that's most important. If you have those things taken care of, you can probably figure out a way to navigate around the world. Okay, so let's not overinvest in one area if it's going to prevent you from having that universal passport that we have used to navigate the world. Unfortunately, when you have parents who only know how to succeed within someone else's bureaucracy, they don't know that you can navigate the world that way because they never did themselves. It's not a business model or a life approach that they understand, are comfortable with, or would like to teach or impress upon other people.
yeah. One of my strongest memories is just kind of on how you process this with kids. One of my best friends has done very well financially. He is a guy, I mean, he's a guy that drives a Jeep, kind of ripped up jeans, baseball cap. You would maybe think he worked at a steel mill, like if you just saw him in the grocery store. And one of my best friends, when his oldest son was 10, another parent, I was actually out with them. I think we were getting lunch or something. And another parent kind of cornered him, was kind of yelling at him saying, I can't believe you're not putting your son in travel baseball. We need his pitching. What about his future? And my friend Dave just turns to the guy and said, I'm a multimillionaire. When he's 18, I can just buy him a house and a business to run. The guy had no
Yeah.
idea what to do. Like he just couldn't process life like that there was something other than,
Right.
Other than that.
Right.
That thing. What you're mainly leading executives and stuff like that right now, but a lot of them have kids. Where do you go with that as far as because like with our oldest, I mean, she's doing ballet and gymnastics. She wants to do basketball. It's kind of cool. I mean, freaking 5 years old, do whatever. I'm not too concerned about any of it. Just do some stuff. What do you, looking back at like you succeeded at a high level? What do you recommend for parents with their kids? Also balancing possibly growing businesses and careers and stuff like that. Like, where is it worth investing? Where is it just going to screw the kid up and burn them out?
Well, I don't think you want your kids to be rich and famous before they are ready for it. And so you can
Yeah.
look at the lives of child actors or something. And almost always, it's just a nightmare, right? So the parents might be better off temporarily because their kids are rich and famous, but the kids almost are never well off. So all these kids making millions of dollars on YouTube, by the time they're 30, they may still have millions of dollars, but they're going to have a lot of problems that you can't fix with millions of dollars. Probably better to have not millions of dollars and not have those problems. So you want to push your kids to learn how to be resilient because nothing's going to come easy to them at first, and so you can't just say, well, let them do what they want to do. Like, well, they want to just eat sugar and play around, which is you can do that at times, but you also want to learn how to push through adversity. Also, you want to be cognizant of what are they naturally inclined to do? What are they better at than their peers with very limited effort? Okay, well, that might be an area that they can focus on. As it pertains to adults, a lot of adults come to me where they make good money doing what they're doing, but they don't want to keep doing it. And I ask them, what are you naturally really good at that other people think is weird that you're so good at it? that is an area of talent. And you can identify that in yourself. You can identify that in kids. Those are going to be the areas where the least amount of effort is going to result in the most amount of progress. And so keep an eye out for that for your kids. But ultimately, there's no one answer. You need to create kids who are capable of socially succeeding, capable of being friends, playing nice with other people when they need to, playing mean with other people when they need to. Learning how to do math, I think, is really, really important, because if you don't do math, it's hard to understand why people are lying to you in many ways. But math isn't the only thing. You obviously want to learn how to read and comprehend information. You want to learn how to move your body, how to develop healthy habits. So there's no one answer. There isn't a template that you can follow that's going to guarantee success. But what you can do, is, in my experience, is like learn how to be smart. When you learn how to be smart, you can navigate your car around new obstacles as they come your way. If you just set the destination into the GPS, well, the GPS is dumb. It's going to drive over the tire that's sitting in the middle of the road, and it's not going to swerve around it. Like, you need to be a dynamic driver in your kid's life, in your own life. You need to be smart enough to turn the car to the right when it doesn't make sense to continue on the path that your map says to.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's really interesting. I think this doesn't bother me. I think probably it bothers my wife and probably women in general more, because statistically women to be a little bit more agreeable on the big 5 personality test, right? But like my daughter, our oldest daughter, very girly, kind of all princessy stuff and stuff right now because she's in kindergarten. But she wants to go hunting with me. I got her a bow for Valentine's Day, and so she has a little kid's bow and arrow that, like, it wouldn't even break the skin if she accidentally hit me with it. It'll puncture a milk jug. And I do archery. She likes to do that. What's interesting about when you said kind of people who run faster on the hamster wheel, I had good friends in suburban Chicago that I care about, that my friend said to me, "Why would you buy any child a weapon?" And I was like, how are we going to figure out a game plan to tell your wife you're gay? This news is going to come hard. But it's funny, like when I was saying you and I grew up so different. You grew up in a place where I would expect you to say, why would you buy any child a weapon? And I grew up in a place where the freezer gets filled with no money because you go get it. And I think that I'm probably somewhat aggravating to my neighbors because I'm so different in that way. My neighbors have complained because I let my kids walk around without shoes when we walk the dog. And I'm like, yeah, I do. Thank you for your input. I don't care about it.
Well, I think that, a lot of the modern divide is, half the country thinks nature is something to be overcome, and in many ways has become overcome by modern medicine. And half the country thinks nature is something that needs to be interacted with. And, you can't just rely on grocery stores to give you food forever and ever. And so it probably makes sense to kind of know how to hunt it and butcher it, and and live independent of a multinational corporation for some period of time. And so the people who think that also think that there's 2 genders, because if you grow up on a farm, all the animals are one of 2 sexes. Like, there's not gender queer cows or steers. So, I think as technology, a lot of our political divide is about how do we make sense of this new technology that we've stumbled across? Is it a real improvement from what we've had in the past? Is it a fake improvement? Given that if it is a real improvement, how should it change the way we divide labor amongst us? How should it change the way we plan for families? How should it change our reliance on existing institutions? And so as technology progresses faster and faster, the questions that divide us will grow wider and wider. And, who knows what's going to happen as changes in the world come at a greater and greater pace. It will be truly unprecedented.
Dang. No, that's a really good way to think about that. We're a little bit over on time, so we'll kind of hit a couple things here. But really insightful. I do also just want to plug you and say I hired you for a one-off consulting thing, and you solved a problem I was having a very hard time with when I was still in the corporate world. Basically, you helped me understand that a lot of my male coworkers were not particularly high Q through no fault of their own. I'm not being judgmental, but we're also much more effeminate. And I scared them the way I wouldn't be as careful with them as I would be careful not to intimidate like a woman, because I'm 6'6" and I would speak more softly to a woman. And going through the corporate space, I would do. I just didn't do a good enough job of thinking about my male coworkers as functional women. So anyway, you can, I'll put Alex's stuff in the link to this video. Okay. You got to pick up 5-year-old. Let's do last sentence. Election prediction. Okay. RFK just endorsed Trump moments ago. So I'll run this on Sunday so that this gets out quick. You got a prediction, thoughts, reading
predicting chaos.
World.
I'm predicting chaos. I think that most leaders around the world want the Democrats to win because they're weaker. The Democrats obviously want the Democrats to win. Most people know that Republicans vote disproportionately on election day. So I am foreseeing some form of exogenous infrastructure, cyber interference in the election that Democrats allow to happen because they have no real incentive to stop it. There's no way you can prove it through the court system. There are no election do-overs in the event of this. So I'm anticipating there's going to be something happening that makes it more difficult for people who are counting on voting on election day to actually vote.
Yeah. Dang. Alex Feinberg, you can find out the details on the link or the links below this video. I'll let you go do that thing. Thanks for the time, man.
Thank you, Seth.